So David's the co-founder and CEO of Lyra Health, which is a leader in providing behavioral healthcare solutions through technology. Lyra Health is a very successful 7-year-old, I wouldn't even say startup at this point, it's a very mature company. It recently raised a 435 million Series F round led by Cote and Dragoneer Investment Group. The most important metric is really like it serves 2.2 million members globally. It offers mental health. It offers a mental health platform to companies as a benefit for their employees. I'll get into more of it, but I was a happy customer for it, for the platform myself. It provides both in-person and online therapy, but it's most importantly telehealth first. It onboards patients online and uses artificial intelligence to match them to the right care providers. And patients can choose to go whether in office or book an online appointment. It also has expanded its offering to now provide resources such as like worksheets, reading material, quizzes, and also access to the Calm app. So that's in a nutshell about Lyra Health. But what's interesting is David has been at a bunch of other successful companies at executive roles. So, previously David was the CFO for Meta back in the day when it was called Facebook in 2009, which was and served there for roughly 5 years. But most importantly, took them public in 2012. Which was definitely one of the fun journeys there. He also held various roles at product and business roles at Genentech, but then served as a CFO for them for 4 years. And he's an alumni of Brown University, which is a major in international relations and economics. That's at a high level. David, do you feel free to add any other important details for the crowd if I might have missed any or misrepresented?
No worries. I think I have plenty of time today to fill in any details that I think might be interesting. So we can keep going.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So I think before I jump into the question, I really wanted to share a personal story and the reason that I got very excited about this chat. So I'd spent roughly 8 years at Meta in various roles, engineering or product. And if folks have been at Meta, it's just a high performance, intense culture. And we've gone through our own journeys of pushing really hard, winning. And there was a point roughly in I think in the COVID time when things got really hard for me, and I basically burnt out, right? Which is one of those things that isn't spoken as much. And I leaned a lot on the Lyra Health platform to connect with the therapists, to connect with the right members to really help me navigate my work-life balance well. And I really found a special coach where I felt she we built a really relationship built on trust, and it really transformed my career, right? I was able to change a team, I was able to progress, and it really got down to nothing big, but it was really figuring out the right ways to keep yourself energized and invest a lot in self-care techniques. And what was amazing to me is as I went through the journey myself, I started talking to a lot of my peers and coworkers, and there was a sort of a semi-community that was getting built as we started talking about some of our challenges, which was amazing. And it kind of destigmatized this entire piece in the workspace, which was super amazing. So as soon as I saw that there's an opportunity to talk to David, I was I would love to chat with you because I was a happy customer.
Well, let me start by saying thank you for telling that story, and I'm glad we were there for you. That is why Lyra exists, is to help people in moments when they need some support. And anytime we do that, it makes me feel good and proud to be a part of it.
Awesome. Cool. With that, I would love to jump into questions. So, David, I've structured the talk mostly around two aspects. I think mental health, raising awareness for that. But then also you've gone through a bunch of large company, working at larger companies, but then also running a successful startup, which would be great learnings for a lot of the SPC members who are trying to bootstrap their journey. So maybe we would love to get started with what got you interested in the mental health space, given your background was, mostly centered around finance in the typical, in the larger companies.
Yeah, happy to start there. And let me just say hello to everyone who is on the call today. And please do, if you have questions, chime in along the way. I'm obviously here to be as helpful to you as I can be. So happy to talk about anything that's on your minds. But now I will answer the question. So I was inspired to start Lyra after a personal experience that my family had trying to navigate the mental health system. It was an eye-opening experience in several ways. One, I got to see how confusing and difficult and frustrating it can be just to find care. We really struggled, took many months just to get an appointment with a provider. And when we did, the provider wasn't a good fit and wasn't helpful. And we repeated that experience a second time and then gave up. In our journey, we got really lucky about a year later, and through word of mouth, we were introduced to a psychologist who we really wouldn't have found otherwise. The person still isn't in any health plan network, doesn't market themselves, had a long waiting list. So we had to wait a long time and we had to pay in cash to see him. But when we did, we got to see kind of the other side of the story, which is how life-changing and really magical it can be when you get the right care to the right person. And similar to what you were saying, Vinay, I think sometimes people have a misperception, maybe from the movies or TV, that mental health care is, lying on a couch and talking about your childhood. And that's not what Lyra is about. And that's not the care we found that helped my family member. It's really practical, tangible skill building, teaching you how to challenge thoughts that are getting in your way, teaching you how to change behaviors that are getting you in situations you don't want to be in, and teaching you to have a different relationship with your emotions and your feelings so you can manage them better as well. And to watch this sort of very logical, very thoughtful approach work so well in helping someone develop skills they didn't have and be in a better position to manage the challenges in their life was such an inspiring experience and made such a big difference to all of us that I got really interested in the idea of trying to build a company to help the next person in need, to have a very different, simpler, better journey than the one we had, and to help them find great care really quickly so that they could live a better life. And I thought that would be a really important and fun and challenging thing to do.
Makes sense, David. That's super interesting, and especially as it's common wisdom at this point, like solve your own problem. And if you are able to kind of see through successfully through this journey, then I think you had a very good idea of the problem, and especially on the both ends, as you mentioned. So I think that's super interesting. Awesome. Cool. Maybe switching gears real quick to, there are a lot of Meta employees here, and I wanted to chat a bit about your initial journey as you took like Facebook public, which was, at that time, I believe the largest IPO, but it had challenges. There was a dip in the first week, and it took a while or up to a year even for the price to really come back to the IPO side. Maybe walk us through what that journey looked like of taking company public, managing, through the downturn, and then, emerging successfully.
Yeah, so I'm happy to give sort of a quick response, and then people can ask more questions if you have them. But the first thing I'd say is I loved my experience at what was then called Facebook. So I was there about 5 years and really just learned so much. I've had such a great group of colleagues and such an impressive team of people. And I got to work on a lot of really interesting projects and fun projects. One of the biggest was the journey of navigating through the IPO. The whole thing probably took about 6 months from beginning to end, was pretty all consuming for me, hopefully not for that many other people, but certainly if you're in the CFO chair during something like that, there's just a lot of work to do, so one-time work to do, much of which was really fun and interesting, and a really nice camaraderie of team developed, which I really look back on pretty fondly. At the same time, the project itself didn't achieve some of its key goals. We were hoping for a different outcome in terms of how the stock would trade in the immediate aftermath. So that was disappointing, and certainly made for a difficult period of time as we navigated that. Fortunately, the business continued to perform really well, and ultimately the stock followed, and the company has performed well in the aftermath of that over time. So it was a short-term challenge to live through and manage through, but worked itself out.
Got it. Makes sense, David. What would you do differently if you were, taking Facebook public again or going through that journey again?
Yeah, I can share a couple of lessons. I mean, the first thing I'd say is, if you're ever anyone in the audience is in a circumstance where you're thinking about taking a company public, is just understanding what your objectives are is really important. I was watching the TV show about WeWork recently, and when they get to the IPO period, they frame it as this like unbelievably important thing. One of the characters describes it as their raison d'être, their reason for being, which it shouldn't be, in my opinion. It's a financing event. It's an important one. Like, you want to do all your financings well. It comes with certain obligations and opportunities for liquidity that you don't have in private financings, but it really shouldn't be like the reason for being for your company. And putting it in context, I think, helps a little bit. And I think two of the things that I can share in terms of learnings, one is not that actionable. We had a really hard time executing the actual transaction on the NASDAQ exchange the day we did. They kind of botched the technical integration. I'm happy to tell the story if people want to hear it, but it's, that really set us back and was very disappointing. But I think the bigger one, or the more learnable one, is we chose to go public at a time when the business was in a period of transition. Things were moving from desktop to mobile, and many of you may remember this was even coming out of a period where the company didn't show any ads on mobile devices. So all of the revenue came from desktop use, but usage was very quickly moving to mobile. And so it was a volatile period for the company, and the sort of the investor perspective was very much dependent upon the psychology of how that was going to go, as opposed to some hard quantitative number that could appear at the moment. And basically what we learned is when you're in a moment of volatility where psychology is that important, it can change really quickly. So when we were originally executing the deal, there was great optimism that we would have a successful shift to monetizing mobile use. And then just as quickly as that came, it left. And investors got really concerned that that wasn't going to be successful and we weren't going to be able to make money from mobile usage, and the stock went down. And then as we proved that we could and the performance came back, then everybody got super excited and the stock went up again. And so if you have the opportunity to take a company public, it would be ideal to do so through in a moment that isn't as volatile and sort of with as much business uncertainty as I think we faced in 2012. So you may not be able to control it. And as I said before, it's not the end of the world. You'll get through it. But stable periods in a business's journey are easier periods to take a company public through.
Got it. Yeah, I think especially the mobile turnaround was very impressive, and the way ads were introduced even on the mobile side was pretty fascinating. I was part of that early team, so it was very exciting to see how that was manifested, and it worked out well.
Yeah, the product and engineering teams that you were working with executed phenomenally, and it really was, I don't think it could have been done much better, but that doesn't mean there wasn't an up and down along the way and everybody's confidence that it would be done well.
Awesome. Cool. So David, now moving on to your startup journey. So, rolling back to the early days of when you started, Lyra Health, maybe walk us through, how did you narrow down on the idea? How did you get the conviction really that, this is an idea worth pursuing, where you're ready to put in a large amount of your years towards it? So walk us through that idea maze. How did you build the conviction? Because it's super helpful for us as early, stage explorers to understand from you.
So someone once told me this expression that I thought was kind of cool, which is ideally you don't start a company starts you. Which I take to mean that one way of doing it, and I would say, in my opinion, a preferable way, isn't that you sort of sit around in a room and you say, I want to start a company, and you find the idea that you think, oh, maybe this product will work, and so I'll start a company to do it. But ideally, there's a product you want to build so badly or a problem you want to solve so badly, and the company is your vehicle to do the work that you're excited to do and that you're passionate about. And for me, that I think has been was a really important part of the early days of the journey. I never was the kind of person who walked around saying, I must start a company, I will start a company. It was a problem I was really interested in working on, and starting a company became the way to do that. And one of the reasons I share that with you, you probably all have a sense for this already, but if you choose to start something or have already started something, it's really hard. It's without a doubt the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. And, it just takes so much, not just work, but so much, it's so draining emotionally, it's so difficult. There's so many ups and downs. And so ideally you want to be working on something that you're so committed to, you believe in so strongly that it propels you through all of those challenges. And that's certainly been the case for me. We've had so many difficult moments and twists and turns and everything else. But I've never in 7 years had a day where I felt like I wished I was working on something else. Every day I get up in the morning and this is the problem I want to work on. I wish I was better at it pretty much every day, but this is the thing I want to do. And so anyway, just some feedback for all of you to think about it, where you are in your journey is to note the benefits of working on something that you're so passionate about. You could imagine that even on the worst day, you still want to be working on it because you just want it to exist in the world. Then you asked the question about getting it off the ground. For me, maybe I lacked a little courage, and one of the things that I needed was some other people to sort of prop me up and encourage me and give me the confidence to take the plunge, because it's scary, and I was scared. And I was fortunate that the first people I really connected with on who ultimately became my co-founders were some investors who I'd known for a long time, so I had great friendship with, great confidence in, and they were just as excited about this space as I was, and really believed in what was possible. And their energy and their enthusiasm and their confidence was needed. I would go so far as to say their false confidence, like they know how hard it is starting companies, but that wasn't what they needed to tell me then. They would just tell me like how great it was going to be. And it took years later, they would tell me the challenges that they knew that we would face together. And then just in case helpful, I'll tell you the last piece of the puzzle, because I do have a memory of like the one meeting that finally pushed me over the edge was I'd set up a dinner with a healthcare leader, someone who's a purchaser of healthcare for a large company, and someone I knew and respected, and I knew to be thoughtful. And over dinner, he was just so enthusiastic about the idea, and he was a potential buyer. He was a potential customer for the business we ended up building. And he just really, it wasn't that we had a great product yet or even knew what we were going to build. He just wanted something different in this space. And to find someone who was really well connected, had thought about this a long time, expressing such desire to see innovation in the space, I felt like was a sign. You know what I mean? It was like I walked out of the dinner, I was like, what am I waiting for? Like this, just the pieces seem like they're in place. And that I think gave me the last piece of courage I needed to get started.
Got it. Makes sense, David. I definitely agree with that healthy dose of naivety to take the plunge. In my case, it was leaving a large company like Meta, and I've done that twice, so I can hear you. Makes sense. Can you talk a bit? So it sounds like you had conviction on the idea. Obviously, it's a problem you had faced. What's the next step? Like how did you figure out the strategy? To me, the strategy is very unique. It's not a pure consumer play. You went the B2B route, which is very interesting. So maybe just like help me understand, or the crowd understand, like how did you think about strategy, your go-to-market, who are your initial customers, and
Yeah, that was a really fun part the first couple of years of the company. And I don't think I managed it particularly well, but I'm happy to tell the stories about it. Because I think what we really had was a sense of what we wanted the member experience to be. So by that, I mean the person in need. We had an idea, we hadn't built it yet, but an idea for like, we want to use technology to make it really easy for that person to find a provider who's available tomorrow and who has all the right skills and approach that they're going to be a great match for that person. So it didn't feel like this random walk through an enormous community. It felt like a very personalized, here's the right care for you. And then after matching you with the right care, we were really committed to the idea that let's follow people in a way that health plans don't, so we can see if they get better or not. And that, working at a place like Meta that's so full of data and uses the data so thoughtfully to make things work better, healthcare system doesn't do that. Those of you who work in healthcare will know generally it doesn't track anything. So it's really hard to know how it's going or how to make it better. And so the idea of a mental health journey where we stayed in touch with the person getting care and measured their symptoms over time and saw if they were improving would create these feedback loops and this learning, and we could make the system work better. So we had all that kind of in our heads. We had to figure out the details of it, but we had no idea how to turn that into a business, like who would pay for it. And there are lots of different ways you can go. You could sell it direct to consumers, so you could try and get people to pay you for access to the platform so that they can use that. And that might work. I was really skeptical of that idea because, as again, something I learned at Meta very much is virality is a hugely valuable thing when you're trying to build a direct-to-consumer business. And we were nervous there wouldn't really be virality in mental health, that people wouldn't be that keen to tell all their friends, hey, I needed a therapist, I used this service and it worked well. And that would happen sometimes, but it wouldn't happen enough. And so you'd really have to go out there and acquire every customer, sort of one at a time, and that would be expensive and slow. And we felt like, but the people are out there. There's a lot of people in need. And there are three other potential payers we could think of. There are health plans, there are employers who purchase healthcare for their employees, and there's providers. So there's providers as well. And what we ended up doing, which I don't think was very smart in retrospect, but we really did a pilot with each of those three groups. So we ended up building kind of three different experiences to see what would work. So I think we wasted a fair amount of time. Now that I look back on it, at the time I didn't know better. What we discovered quickly, and then I think we'd made a good decision, we discovered quickly that the employer pilot was just working well. That we had some key challenges, which I think I'll get to in subsequent questions, that we didn't know if we could solve, and they were being solved in the employer pilot. It was just working. Everybody was happy, and we had real traction. And so the thing that we did smartly then was we turned off the other two very quickly. We didn't give them a chance to fix themselves. We just ended them, turned them off, and said we're going to put every person and every dollar into trying to make the service available through employers. And that hasn't changed since we made that decision in mid-2016.
Makes sense. And David, as any marketplace, how did you bootstrap the two ends, right? Whether it's the providers or the patient, you figured out the person or the entity that would pay, which is great, but you still needed a healthy enough network to get some validation. So how did you bootstrap that initial one?
Yeah, as you can imagine, and any of you who are thinking about or are working on a marketplace like that, that was our obsession. Like, how do we get the members and how do we get the providers? Because we're nothing without both sides. And so that was all we thought about. And if you'd asked me any point in those first couple of years, what's the most likely way this business will fail? It would be those two things. And I would vary by day which one I was more worried about. Like, we won't get enough clients or we won't get enough providers. But that was what we worried about a tremendous amount. So we worked really hard on trying to find a way to market to potential members that would destigmatize mental health. So the first big expense at the company, other than hiring people, was we hired like a pretty name brand marketing firm to come up with a campaign so that when we had a customer, we could launch with, digital and physical collateral that would make people interested and encourage them to get mental health there. And they came, I'll tell you the story because I hope it's kind of funny. So they came up with this very complicated and I thought pretty clever campaign that they called Just as Harmful. And the idea was like walking around with depression is just as harmful as, and then they came up with these funny pictures of like a person with a harpoon through their chest in the cafeteria. And it's like, depression's just as harmful as this. And then someone else with anxiety, they were saying anxiety is just as harmful as, and it was someone with like a snake about to bite them. And so you'd look at it and you'd be like, why am I looking at a picture of that about to happen? And then hopefully you'd be drawn in and you'd laugh and you'd think about using the service. What's funny in retrospect is then we took all this collateral we built to the customers and they were like, no, that's too graphic. You can't use any of that. So no, that was not our best investment. But luckily for us, what we learned very quickly was that there was tremendous latent demand from people who were struggling and who were willing to raise their hand and get care if we convinced them that it would be easy and confidential and all of those things. So when we launched our very first customer was eBay. And we got eBay as a customer through networking. Sometimes having a network is when you don't have a product and you have no track record, you just need people to believe in you. And so we were fortunate that there were a lot of people willing to vouch for us, and eBay was willing, and I'm ever grateful to them that they were willing to work with us because it was a risky decision for them. But we took bets in the company on how many eBay employees would come to us in the first month, and everybody put their numbers in. And we were short, the highest estimate was short by about 5x for what we actually saw. So it turned out that while we were deathly fearful of not having enough engagement on the client side, that wasn't the biggest problem we faced, that the demand was there. On the provider, so that's the client side. On the provider side, there was no substitute for just sort of hard work, blocking and tackling. So in the early days when eBay said they were going to work with us, every single member of the company, including me, including the engineers, including everybody, had to stop what they were doing, and they were given a list of providers in certain geographies and a spreadsheet, and they had to call them and recruit them. That is what I did every day for several weeks, was call providers myself and convince them to try and work with us. We had a script for why they should and how it would work, et cetera. And And just one by one, we got enough traction to have a successful launch. And then, as all things that work well, we had the benefit of network effects, where then we could call the providers who were happy with us, and they told their friends and they told other colleagues, et cetera. So that's worked really well. We now have over 20,000 providers around the world who are signed up, and it's been a really nice, fun part of the model. But the early days, it was truly doing totally non-scalable things just to get off the ground.
Got it. David, there are so many lessons there, especially as most of us that are attempting to build a B2B startup, getting your foot in the door and getting eBay like your first customers is such a huge win, and it kind of like sets such a great foundation for any future growth. So awesome work on that. Can you talk a bit about raising capital and how are you able to raise? Was there any particular strategy to raise capital, given this wasn't a category possibly a top of mind for VCs, or I don't know if in the past they had seen large scale businesses being built out of it. Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that I really had a mindset that I still have, that the investors I wanted to attract would be partners in building the business. I wasn't looking for someone who was just a check, and that solely. And the reason for that primarily was because I needed so much help. There was so much I didn't know about the healthcare system, about mental health. I really wanted to work with people who would bring an expertise and a network that would complement our growth. And I think that really worked. The early investors in Lyra were deeply involved. We met all the time and were so helpful to me. We would not have gotten eBay without Greylock, for example. They were really helpful to that. And Venrock was our other earliest investor, and they were so helpful in recruiting talent and getting us meetings and all of those things. So I think the first thing is know what you need. Some of you on this call may start a company where you don't need that, and it's just about the money or whatever else, but I really needed help. So prioritize trying to find people who could offer me something, and I think that was the right decision. Another thing I'd say that was, worked well for me is I guess maybe more than some founders, I really believe in the value of having, checks and balances. I wasn't looking for this to be a company that I would control and you as an investor would be just passively along for the ride. I really wanted to build it together with other people and for them to have voice. And I've had great managers in my career, and I've done better work and been smarter because of it. I wanted to think of our investors as the folks who are going to help me and make me better. And, you've got to be willing to answer to them in order to have that kind of relationship. Otherwise, it's hard, right? The first time I told the story was terrible, and I got a bunch of feedback about how confusing it was, and you got to listen. And I read somewhere, and this really resonated with me because I didn't do it, and I should have in at least some of our rounds. You want to spend the first week meeting with investors who you don't think you're going to close, so you can figure out what all the things you're doing wrong and all the questions you're going to get, and then focus on the ones that are really your targets when you're ready to meet with them. And I think that's a great strategy, honestly, because I think in one of our rounds in particular, I finally found my stride after I'd been turned down by the folks who I was really hoping to convert. And the thing with mental health that you may not have, and it depends what you're working on, I was able to find a bunch of people who are passionate about the space, and that's that exists in a field like mental health. I'm not the only person who's had either a personal or a family member go through the experience, and there is no doubt at all that the meetings feel completely different when the person approaches it from the standpoint of, I'd like to be your partner. You have to convince me, but I'd like you to convince me because I'd really like to work on this, is different than them starting out really neutral. And that was not the case in 100% of the meetings, right? There are plenty of investors who are not passionate about this and not aware of it. But I think the ones we converted were highly likely to have had some reason that they would have liked to be a part of the Lyra journey.
That's awesome. Really, really good tips. As we are fundraising, to find the right partners and investors who are definitely passionate about the same problem. So definitely +1 to that. Awesome. Switching gears to now just talking about mental health for knowledge workers. All of us are pushing really hard at SPC and various endeavors. Would love to get your sense for how much of work burnout do you see as a key issue in US versus other markets, and what are some of the causes for it?
Yeah, so I definitely think that mental health is a big challenge for lots of people, and it's global. It's not limited to the US. And you asked, like, what are the causes of it? I hope this isn't an answer that's too off track, but I'll give you like the starting point for my answer is, I think most things that are present in, 20% of people are there because at some point in time, there was some evolutionary benefit to them existing. So why is anxiety so prevalent among humans, among all of us on this call? Because we're not that many generations removed from forefathers or ancestors or whatever who actually were like living in really dangerous times and could be eaten or die, or from whatever else. I'm going back like pre obviously society. And if you're in a world where there are saber-toothed tigers running around or whatever, some anxiety is actually pretty healthy to help you live to be old enough to pass on your genes. So you're kind of paying attention to your surroundings and you're worried about what could go wrong and those sorts of things. And so it was helpful to not have your head in the clouds and think everything was perfect, but to have some sense of anxiety and some sense of concern about being left out of the crowd, because the way humans survived was by banding together. And so unfortunately for all of us, that anxiety got pretty hard baked into who we are as people, as humans, because there was utility to it, just like a lot of other things that are a part of who we are, though we wish could make go away. So I don't think it's ever going away. I think it's part of, maybe we can evolve out of it, but it's just part of who we are. Now, in terms of what's happening today, there's no doubt in my mind that like the world has gotten more stressful and more difficult in certain ways. The workplace would be an obvious one. If you guys ask, if the people on this call, if you ask your grandparents like what the work environment was like when they went in, they likely were taking a job that they could have been confident they could do for their whole lives. You took a position at a company, you worked at that same company for decades, and the job didn't change that much during those decades because there wasn't that much, once we'd figured out this is how we're going to approach accounting or real estate or whatever, there wasn't a lot of innovation in those spaces. So you learned your job and then you did it. That's just not the world we live in nowadays. It's changing much more quickly. It's much more stressful. Companies don't have the same commitment to their workers. So it's really easy to understand why work is one of the reasons that we struggle more than we used to. Is work is not this secure, solid, nothing to worry about place. It's stressful and difficult. And, ideally in every company that you all work at or start or whatever, you would love to create an environment that has just the right level of intensity, where everybody is like really focused and, doing their best work and feeling that little bit of stress that propels you forward, but not too much that, causes you to really break down or feel dysfunctional. The problem is whatever environment you create is not going to be that perfect place for everybody because we're all different. It's sort of like by definition, if you create an intense work environment and you want some amount of intensity, it'll be too much for some. So every company has that sort of dynamic and every environment does. So the workplace has become more stressful. Personal life has become stressful in different ways that we've all can imagine. Also, it's just you're much more exposed to what's going on in the world and what's going on among, colleagues and friends and everything else. So it's just a much more intense, environment, social environment. And then you layer on things like COVID and, other things that we don't control. We don't know how they're going to happen. They create more uncertainty. So all of those things contribute, everything from the beginning evolutionary context to the specific context of today, contribute to a world where we have more depression, we have more anxiety, we have more substance abuse, we have more suicide than we've had before as a society. And so it is there, and it's our job to step up with solutions that match the scope of the problem.
Makes sense, David. Great. This segues really well into the next question, which is, what changes can companies, bring to help their employees combat mental health challenges? Obviously, introducing Lyra Health would be great, but are there other things they would do as well?
For sure. So the first thing I would say, if you're thinking about this challenge in the context of your group or your company, is I would very much encourage you to think about it as a challenge that is addressable. We have good treatments for many people. We can change people's mind about stigma, about suffering and silence. Like you can make progress on this if you choose to. When we think generally, we think the three main sort of areas for improvement or vectors to focus on are: one, engagement, like getting more people in need to raise their hand and get care. Access. Those that do want to get care should get care quickly. If it's going to take you 3 months, a lot of people are going to drop out along the way. That happens all too often. And then third is quality. It's great to get care, but if the care is not a good match for what you need and isn't high quality care and you don't get better, we haven't really accomplished a lot. And I think there's no doubt that with Lyra, with other solutions, you can address all three of those things with a solution that is targeted to do those things, that measures those things, that reports to you on those things in a way that a traditional health plan is not going to. So you do have to be willing to innovate, but you can innovate on in all of those areas. But I'll add to that, because I think this was kind of the spirit of your question. There's so much more you can do in addition to, who you might partner with or what solution you would bring by just talking about it. There's in every company we work with, we can generate a noticeable spike in engagement if an executive at the company is willing to talk about mental health in some kind of public forum. It's just like to make it okay. To have the conversation. So if you are in an environment where you want to address this, talk about it and make it okay to talk about. And train other people who are important. Train your managers and train your HR team to talk about it, which is easy enough to do, so that you create multiple conversations that are encouraging people in need to get care if they need it. And I guess the sort of philosophical piece I would leave you with to consider is, I think historically, it gets back to what I was talking about earlier, that an executive often prizes some amount of intensity. You want to be the kind of place that's in a hurry to get stuff done, and when people feel, that sort of intense sense of urgency. And so you may have a concern that talking about mental health will be contradictory to that goal, that by doing so, by encouraging people to take care of yourself, you're sending a mixed message that and I don't believe that, but that's something to work through on your own. I think that the best work environments have a great amount of intensity combined with a great amount of support and empathy. And that's kind of the beautiful place to get to, is where you don't feel like you're sacrificing that sense of commitment to deliver against goals, to move quickly, to out-execute your competitors, but you're there for your employees when they need support or when they need a break or whatever else. And I think that finding that trade-off proactively, if you're running a company, and how are you going to talk about it, how are you going to have that conversation, I think is better than hoping it happens while you don't address it.
Got it. Yeah, I think David, that's a really good pro tip around that. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So David, moving to maybe we have 5 minutes before we open it up to the audience section. I wanted to talk about the future plans, right? So one of the things that's very remarkable with how Lyra Health is going about with its business is really expanding to other markets. And a lot of marketplaces of products, and we are from the Web3 world, right? And building a company there. How do you scale from US to other markets? What are some learnings? Because that to us is a very interesting lesson that you can share.
It's going to be really hard, and we're doing it now, and it's going well, but it's, we're in the early stages. So I want everybody to know, I love to talk about it, but I don't want you to have the sense that oh, we did it and here's how we're doing it right now. And it's really hard in our space because healthcare looks different from country to country. So we even have different rules and regulations and different nomenclature and, all of these things. It's just not the same. The ace in the hole we have that we're counting on to make this work is that most of our customers are global to some degree or other, and they want to offer a unified and consistent mental health solution to their employees. So it's hard for a company, let's use Meta because we've been talking about it. It's a little bit hard for Meta, which I hope and I believe cares about its employees all around the world, to stand up and say, for our US employees, we've got this great mental health solution, we really care, but if you're outside the US, sorry, you just are stuck with what we had before and it's not working very well. That's different than being able to say to all your employees, we have this premium solution. And so we're trying to use that desire on the behalf of customers, on the behalf of employers, as the energy that creates the marketplace in multiple countries. And we'll see if it works. It seems to be working well so far, so I'm excited about it. The other thing we decided to do that I think was the right move for us, may not be the right move for anybody else, was rather than just build it ourselves, we decided to buy. So we purchased a company that has been providing mental health services globally for over 30 years. They don't have the kind of technology platform we have, but they have relationships with providers locally. They know the local customs and rules and regulations. They have licenses. So they have a bunch of the blocking and tackling kinds of assets. And the idea is their local knowledge plus our tech platform could make us successful in all of these markets quickly. And so we did decide to go that route. The company we bought does work in 150 countries in 60 languages. Together, we have 10 million members around the world who have access to our services now, and they're really familiar with all the local nuances and rules. And I think that in our space, that was a better strategy than thinking we could do it country by country on our own.
Dude, that's awesome, especially like the strategic acquisition side. I'm sure the growth looks exciting based on what you're describing. Awesome. So things look really good for the company. What are some of risks or challenges that you're spending time on?
So, well, one is international. I won't repeat that, but I spent a lot of time on that. The second is growth. We're at that stage that's kind of fun, but kind of hard, where our first idea, the idea we founded the company on, is the product we have in the market today, and that's working. But then you have to come up with your next idea. And it's harder sometimes because you didn't have that next idea to begin with. So you've got lots of ideas and you have to figure out which the right one is. And so figuring out how we grow the services that we bring to our customers, what additional services we add, and how we build them, I spend a lot of time on. Really fun, really interesting, but hard, because the first idea is often the best one. It's often the easiest. It's often the one that gets traction most quickly. And then the third thing is, of course, people. It's Lyra is only as good as the talent we attract and retain. And so making sure that we have a great group of people, that we're attracting new great people, and that we're creating a great work environment and a sense of opportunity for the people we have is always a huge part of my week and must be.
That's great. Makes sense. And David, I've been asking a lot of questions. So I'll ask final one and then I'll open up to the crowd. Any advice or tips on how SPC members could leverage Lyra health benefits?
Well, if you work at a company and your company is interested in a mental health solution, call me and we'll be happy to tell you more about it, and you can evaluate whether it's something that would make sense for the business that you're a part of or that you're building. As I said, I think the starting point, most importantly, is to really do a soul searching on your own and ask if you care about this, and if mental health is something that you want to be an important priority in your work environment, then you don't have to work with us, but then you have opportunities to follow through on that and make the right investments. And if it's not, then don't, right? I would disagree with you, but I wouldn't want to sell you if this just isn't something that you really feel like is a first order priority or challenge for you.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot, David. We can open it up to audience questions. There are a bunch of audience questions in here from, I believe, Brady. Do you want to fire away?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see. Sorry, I didn't have it up. Let me bring it up. The first question was, I guess I saw from your website that you're a remote first, I guess I forget the right term, but remote friendly company. And if that's the case, I was curious how you ended up with that policy. Was it a pandemic change? And just your reflections on that, how it's going, what you need to do to make it work well.
Yeah, it's a great question and a great one to ask everyone. I wish I had, some super proprietary answer, but I can tell you how we got here and what we're doing about it. So we were pretty much a Bay Area company where most everyone, 90% or whatever, came into the office before the pandemic. But the one thing that we'd done that was, I think, good because it gave us the conviction to change was there were two teams that when we started building them, we built them all fully remote. So there was never a nexus for two of our teams, the client support team and the sales team. And there were two of our best teams. They were super engaged, no turnover, just great feedback from them. And they built every process to be remote from the beginning. So they never were stuck in the sort of half and half. They had that, everything that they did was meant to work remotely. And so when the pandemic hit, it gave us confidence that, we could keep hiring locally, even though there was no office, or we could just open the door for every group to expand nationally, and decided to do the latter. And it was a great success in terms of opening up labor pools to be bigger, right? It's just easier to hire if you're not limited to whatever geography is your home. And so we were able to grow a lot during the last couple of years. And we made everything work remotely. We are now in the same place that so many companies are, where we're trying to figure out what the new world looks like, where some of us can go into the office every day and some of us can't because they live in, Nevada or New York or Texas or whatever else. And we're figuring that out. I think it's going okay so far. Our office is open. What we tend to have encourage people to use it for are three things. One, just people who live locally and want some social interaction, because that's good. Like, it's nice to know your colleagues and you want to come in. And so we encourage people to come in one day a week just to meet people and have random conversations and all those things. Two is for one-on-ones if both of you are local. Like, if you're going to have a one-on-one locally, why not have it in person if you're both available, because it's more fun and you'll have that sort of social time and everything else. And then the third is to gather people, even if you have to fly them in, for certain kinds of work, like open brainstorming, longer meetings, difficult strategic conversations, the kinds of things that you want some openness. You don't want to be sort of limited to the agenda or the structure of the Zoom meeting. So that's what we've encouraged people to use the office for. We have, at this point, maybe 50 people coming in every day, something in that sort of round number. And they seem to be happy. And we have other people who are like, I'm so happy to not commute. I'll come in when you tell me to, but otherwise I'm not going to. And I think we're at a moment right now where that's working okay. I think the single hardest thing is we have not cracked is what do you do when half the people are in the office and half the people aren't, to make a meeting really work well. I think that still feels kind of stilted and different. So at the moment, we're encouraging people that if it's not fully in person, to have fully remote meetings. So that even if people go into conference rooms in the office, just make it feel like everybody's not there. But I don't know. We will be a fast follower as others help us figure out how to make that work better.
Thank you. Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. I'm currently in the process of brainstorming like different areas that I'm interested in, but I'm struggling with exploring areas that I don't have much experience in. I was curious, how your experience at Genentech informed your decision to start Lyra. Like, do you think you would have had the confidence to start a healthcare company without having had that experience? Like, how did it inform your journey and your success?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't think I would have started it without the fact that I spent the first about 20 years of my career in healthcare. I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, but I at least knew the terminology and the words, and that was important to me. I don't mean to say that that's right for everybody, but I needed that, the confidence that came from that experience. Healthcare is really important. I hope many of you choose to work in it, but it is really complicated and esoteric, and it doesn't make a ton of sense logically. That doesn't mean you can't learn it. Every one of you on this call, I'm sure, can learn it, but you've got to recognize that and be open-minded. It's going to take you a while. Because it's not the kind of marketplace you can look. It is just, legislation and regulation on top of regulation that is accumulated for decades. And you sort of have to unpack all of that to figure out why you're not allowed to do this and you are allowed to do that. There's a bunch of stuff at Lyra we can't do because we're prohibited by state or federal regulation. And just to have comfort with that, why those things exist, what's the spirit of them, et cetera, was helpful to me. So I would not discourage any of you from going into healthcare, but I would encourage each of you, for thinking about it, to be cautious and thoughtful and a little bit more deliberate than you otherwise might want to be if you choose something that's as heavily regulated as healthcare is.
Logan, do you want to go next? And then Michelle, you can go next.
Yeah, first, David, thank you for coming and for the work that you're doing. It's incredibly important. I have a sneaking suspicion that the answer to this question may have to do with your last point. It's how often do you find mental health challenges starting to converge with physical health challenges? And have you considered expanding into more holistic care or coaching that considers treating the whole individual versus just the mental health components?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's no doubt in healthcare that the ideal solution intellectually will be as comprehensive as possible, because the individual in need doesn't think of their mental health separate than their physical health, separate than their financial insecurity or whatever else. They think of themselves, and to be able to go to one place and get support for all of what's challenging them is definitely going to be better. The challenge is that the more you do, the harder it is to do it all really well. And so we've chosen to this point to really focus our energy on a really discrete mental health oriented challenge, because it's hard. And by focusing exclusively on that, we can try to do it better at a higher level of quality than anybody else. But we are constantly thinking about what the next adjacency is. And I think, as I said, it's like, because it makes sense, and your question makes sense. And it would shock me if we don't pursue adjacencies over time, but it's picking the right times and the right moments and the right ways. And we haven't had again, I'll use the word courage. We haven't had the courage to do it yet. And we'll see what the future holds.
Excited to see it when it happens.
Me too.
Hi, David. Thank you for sharing your journey and perspectives in building Lyra with us. A question I have is, what were some of the things you wish you knew before building a business that sells to HR leaders? And how has the space of employer benefits changed over the last 7 years that you were part of the space? Thanks.
Yeah, great. I mean, in terms of things I've known or I wish I'd done differently, I'll give you one thing that I think about sometimes. I told you before that I was really lucky. I had co-founders who were investors who were great and are still great, and I'm lucky to have. I wonder sometimes if I might have served myself better waiting to start the company until I'd found some operational co-founders who were like the right people to build it, who knew things I didn't know, had skills I didn't have, and to build the company with. We have a great team now, and I think can lead the company into the future, but that took a while. And that was, and those were hard days, when there's a problem and you have no idea how to solve it, and you can't turn to anybody else because there isn't anybody else. There's only 3 of you and none of you know how to do something like this. So just something to think about is, understanding where your skills are deepest and understanding where you have gaps that are relevant to the problem you're trying to solve, and at least being mindful if you can fill those gaps before you head on out. That's not answering your question super directly, which was about calling on HR leaders and benefits leaders. So I think that didn't feel like a huge weakness to me, because as a former CFO, I was involved in the procuring of healthcare benefits at the company. So I wasn't the benefits leader doing all the work, but I was the person they were presenting their plan to, who was asking the questions about why this and why that, and can we spend this differently? So I felt like I had a reasonable understanding of who the persona of our buyer, what motivates them, what they have to do to be successful. And that was really helpful, so that when we started selling, I could represent like, no, this is what they care about. This is what they're fearful of. And I think, again, they're a diverse group. It's not like I did that perfectly, but I could do it credibly enough to have some success. And I think that helped us. I think what's changed in the space over time is what waxes and wanes in the space is what's important. And there are moments where the only thing that those leaders are talking about is cost control. Those aren't great moments for Lyra, right? Like, we're trying to convince them to make a bigger investment in mental health. And there's other moments where they realize that like the business will be better off if we invest more in this space. And that's been a big part of our journey that COVID helped with, that obviously we didn't make happen. We're trying to convince people that mental health is an area where your business will do better if you are more active in and you have better solutions. And so we're still on that journey, to be sure, convincing HR leaders around the country and the world to believe that. But it's a more fertile ground to do that today than it's ever been before.
Thank you.
Hi, David. One more question. It's maybe a little tangential, but what is your outlook on digital therapeutics and biomarkers in the mental health space? And is it something that Lyra would get into at some point?
Yeah, biomarkers, I would love to. Digital therapy is a little bit different, but so biomarkers, let me expand that. I'm not even sure what term to use, but just markers. So one of the challenges we have in mental health as a field is that I can't look at you and have any idea if you're struggling with depression. Maybe not any idea, there could be certain signs, but generally I can't know if you're struggling with something like depression or anxiety, and I can't know if it's getting better if you have it without you answering some questions. And self-reported information is useful. That's what we rely on today, but it's not perfect. Right? You may answer questions differently just depending upon the moment or, your perception of the language and the words. So it's not a perfect way to assess who's in need and to assess whether or not we're helping people. And if we could complement self-reported information with other more tangibly measurable things. So you were talking about biomarkers. So if we're going to go bio, it would need to be, something that's in your facial expressions of your blood or whatever that I don't know what to measure, but that would be useful. Other more social measures that you could imagine capturing would be just your physical activity, your social activity. You know, we have phones that could help us know that information if you were willing to let us capture it. But we don't get any of that today because we don't have enough. We're in that sort of cold start situation where we don't have enough goodness to do with it to convince people to give it all to us. But I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that I think that over time that will change and we will develop more measures that help us to assess who is in need and are we helping them. Now you asked about digital therapeutics, which if I'm, what I would define them as is something slightly different, which is using a technology intervention in the way you would otherwise use a drug or therapy or something like that. And our perspective on that is we today use a whole lot of digital content to help people get better. And it's a really important part of the arsenal of what we have to offer you if you're in need. And I would hate to run the business without that because if you're trying to learn a new skill, to help you challenge your thoughts in a certain way, you want to work on that every day, ideally. You don't want to work on that, once a week or once every other week when you can get an appointment with a therapist. And technology allows us to try to make that possible. What's hard about a purely digital experience is that the ideal, the most wonderful purely digital experiences in our lives are delightful. Like the way that using whatever your favorite app is on your phone, it brings you joy. It sort of makes you want to come back the next day. The reality is that learning how to attend to your mental health, how to challenge your thoughts, how to change your behaviors is hard work, and it doesn't have delight in it in the same way. So it's hard to build a digital interaction that you're excited to come back to tomorrow. Not that it can't be done. We definitely have 10% of our members who we can convince to engage and then they'll keep coming back. It's that we have not, and no one has broken through that 10 to even get to 30, much less 90. So a purely digital approach to helping people, given what the work is, and given the challenge of making that work as rewarding as we need to make it, is a hard one. The beauty of seeing a person in addition to using digital technology is there is some delight inherent in seeing a human, be it a therapist or a coach or whatever, who validates what you're saying and makes you feel heard and important. That is in my opinion, that is a basic human need. Why does Facebook as a product work so well? Well, I think one of the reasons is people like to have a platform to tell their story and to quickly hear that someone is listening and cares. So with a human plus technology, we have a really great opportunity to make people feel heard and then motivated to do the work. I'm not saying that can't be done with technology only. It's hard. And it's hard again because dropout rates are just so meaningful and large in all of the purely digital approaches that have been brought to mental health thus far. And we made a conscious decision early at Lyra. So many smart people had worked on this and had not cracked the nut that we weren't going to either. And we did not bet the company on a purely digital approach.
Thank you, David.
Cool, awesome. David, we are at time. Any parting words for the group? Any advice, any tips?
And I probably said what was most important to me, but just your willingness to come today. I hope I was of some utility to you, but just your willingness to listen to other people is a great sign. I think that all of the people who are the best entrepreneurs I've had the chance to work with in my life, if I was to say what's common to all of them, they're all really good listeners. They all learn from other people and get value from the perspective and knowledge and experience that others have. So your willingness to try to do that, I think speaks well of all of you, and keep doing it. And again, you're gonna have to sift through some stuff that's not useful in order to get some stuff that is, but if you have a good mindset that you can find some gold in everybody's perspective, then you'll keep growing and be better positioned to tackle whatever challenges you decide to focus on.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot, David, for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. It was hopefully helpful for everyone. And yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and good luck to everybody.